Good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. My name is Paul Strangini. And one of the things I left off with last night, or yesterday morning, it was also last night though. My wife reminded me, and she's the only person I really think of as my student, oddly enough. She reminded me that in this chapter of Matthew, the last time I taught it, or this idea, and I mean the idea from verse 11, he that is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than thee. Than he. He's greater than thee too. That's what she reminded me. But, and this is a good example of like, how there are a lot of ways you can interpret things. And this one in particular, an interpretation I came up with is Jesus is Alpha and Omega, the first and the last. And that he is the least in the kingdom of heaven. Though honestly, yesterday, and at this point, I thought that interpretation didn't quite make the cut. It does in a sense, is that I don't think there's going to be like if this dude, he's the least in the kingdom of heaven, that the Lord does kind of bring up the rear. He's the vanguard and the rear guard. But because he is Alpha and Omega, the first and the last, the greatest and the humblest. Jesus is simultaneously, the Lord God is simultaneously sort of the proudest and the humblest that ever was. Because obviously he outstrips all of us in everything. And, while simultaneously, Jesus says, I that speak to you am he, the Christ. Something that would terrify or should terrify any one of us to say. But at the same time, if that was true, there he is walking around in the mud, being born in a stable, doing all these very lowly things. He being the creator of all, like, think about your life and how mundane, how utterly profane, You gotta evacuate the waste, you gotta use the toilet. There are so many ways in which, our existence is profane and ought to be humbling, each and every one of us has to do these, we all have to evacuate waste, that's always the common denominator. That's the profanity of our lives. We all have to do it. We all got to get the toilet paper out. Does God have to do that? There's nothing wasteful about God. But he deigned to become a man and was subject to all those things. So I do think it's true that in some way that as the first and the last, the beginning and the ending, it sort of could be applied to him. But I just think of him talking about this in context with John the Baptist. If you think of it as Jesus, it makes it not much of a contrast. You know what I mean? It's like, well, of course he's greater. So I don't know if that is a possible interpretation. But I guess looking back on it, I feel like it's clever. It was clever of me to think of that. But I think I outsmarted myself, perhaps. That's how I look at it now. I look at it and I'm like, I think it's comparing men with men and not saying I'm better than he is. It's true. And honestly, I can still see it. Like in the sense of like, he could be saying it's humble by calling himself the least in the kingdom. He is servant of servants and Lord of lords. The people think King of Kings and Lord of Lords. but also he is servant of servants. So, yeah, I'm not positive about that. There was I thought, a very clever thing I came up with the last time I taught this passage, or one similar to it in one of the other Gospels. I'm not certain it's correct, but it is a very clever interpretation. And then the question area, which I check all the time. I don't check all the time, but I mean to check at least halfway into every Bible study, and usually at the end. Like today, there's someone in the chat. Oh, it's me who said running 5 minutes late today. Sometimes I feel like my whole life is just running a bit late. That's not good. That's one of the flaws about me. Paul's always running a bit late. And when it becomes a joke to other people, then you know it's a problem. At least for me, the thing people, 5 to 10 minutes late. I know people, I have friends and family who it's like, my joke about their time is always like an hour to an hour and a half late. And I don't try to lift myself up by comparison, but I'm working on all my flaws. Or I try to be very conscious of them. That's why for the Bible study I try to get up extra early, because even though I get up extra early, sometimes I'm still late. But actually today it was because I did not get up as early as I like. Okay. We'll pick it up in verse 12 now. It is a beautiful day. The sunrise today was just spectacular. And from the days of John the Baptist until now. Oh, great. The kingdom of heaven suffereth violence, and the violent take it by force. You know how much I thought about that yesterday that I said, oh, I'll think about this? I thought about it zero. I didn't give it a single thought after I got done with the study. I was so busy. All right, there's another flaw, Paul. I had so much work on the brain. I didn't meditate on that one bit. For all the prophets, this 4 helps us connect things. Or I hope so. I'll just give all the interpretations I'm aware of. How about that? For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John, and if you will receive it, this is Elias, which was for to come. He that hath ears to hear, let him hear it. Pains me that the Lord said that right there. Because, what this, when he says that, he's always, marking off, yeah, here's something difficult to understand. Here's a tough one for you. And it went from the least in the kingdom is greater than John, the greatest of the prophets. Which is, like I said, you think about that, but it's saying is the kingdom of heaven. What it takes. It's so much that the least, if Jesus is the least in the kingdom of heaven, how am I going to get in? If the least is greater than John the Baptist, where do I fit in? It's a really, I love that about the preaching of the Lord. It is, there's such a, and then, yeah, the kingdom of heaven suffers violence. Now there's 2 ways of thinking of suffering. Because we often think of it like, I'm suffering. But that's going one step too far along the meaning of what it means to suffer. Especially in the biblical sense, the way it's used, like, suffer not a fool. Or, here's one the skeptics love, suffer not a witch to live. You know what I mean? And it has a sense of allow, of to bear. To bear pain, to suffer pain. To bear fools, to suffer fools. And to suffer for his name's sake means to bear things. It could be pain. It can be it always indicates a sense of bearing, a sense of carrying a weight, a sense of, it can be something, like we think of suffering, pain and suffering. It's funny that people think that, like, well, it's an argument against God. Like, people didn't know that 2,000 years ago when they were writing these things. Like, they didn't know, like, oh yeah, pain. Why does God allow pain? Why does God allow suffering? It's in the text. Like, it gets covered. It's just that people don't like the answer. Because the answer is something like suffer. It's kind of like suffering is good. Suffering builds character. Suffering makes sons of God, is what it says. I mean, that's a trite simplification, no doubt. But suffering, is given you on behalf of Christ, not only to believe on him, but to suffer for his sake. And I'm not going to look it up right now, because, gosh, anyone, it's an odd thing. I don't think it's actually the last verse of Philippians 1. It's the second to last. But I think I always say it's the last verse. It's like at the end of Philippians 1. So what does this mean, though? All right, so the kingdom of heaven suffers violence. It endures violence. And violence here means violence. Let me just pull up my, let's see how this works. I can actually, can I cheat and not do all this stuff I always do? And I figured out why this happens finally. That doesn't work at all. Paul. What about this? Yeah. I don't even want to bring up the window. So I can stick this in there too. That's cool. And I can fit more of it in there. Okay. Where's the violent verse? Verse 12. Okay. I made a mistake. Oh, come on. Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, here we go. Suffereth violence. Yes. It means force. It's interesting. The word for violence is biadzo. The violent is biastes, a violent man. And the word means biazo, to force. And I've seen this verse taken two ways, and there's two obvious ways to take it. Though it was not so obvious to me when... and let's look at suffer real quick. Huh. Yeah, see, the word suffer does not exist there in Greek. See how when I highlight suffereth violence? That means, see how there's one highlight block and it brings up biazo. So suffereth violence means to be the object of force, or to be the one, to have force done upon you, to be that you're the object of the verb force. Because it's transitive. It takes an object. It forces, he forces. Like, I can go, the difference between transitive and intransitive verbs. Intransitive verbs are the ones like he sits, he eats. I mean, you could say he eats food. You could even use forces in an intransitive way, but it'd be awkward. He forces. You're waiting for that subject. He forces what? He just forces. It does something he does all the time. He forces doors. He forces locks. He forces people. He's forceful. So the word suffers, even though I spent time talking about it, is technically not part of this sentence. I mean, it is because the sentence needs an object, and it's the kingdom of heaven. That's the object of the force. The kingdom of heaven has force done to it. It's forced. And the violent take it by force. Oh, wait a second. What's the by? Is this biazo word come in like multiple times? Suffereth violence, and the violent, biastes. No. That's interesting. This word is going to be familiar to you if, of course, you can't see it. Let me just put it. Beep. And you can't see this either, but force, that word. And I'm using a site called Bible Hub, and using the King James. It has the King James numbers embedded in this version of the website. And so when I hover above a word, it actually brings up the King James number and the word in a quick definition. And this word is harpazo. Harpazo, which should be familiar to anyone who knows anything about the rapture. It is the word that is translated to catch up. We should be caught up in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And I don't teach the rapture, but I know all about it. It used to be an obsession of mine. The evils of teaching the rapture. Though I will strenuously advocate against that teaching. Because here's the thing: it is given you on the behalf of Christ to suffer. There's the only place the rapture even makes sense is in America, where everyone's been coddled for so long that we somehow think that Christ doesn't want us to have any suffering, and that is such a poisonous and anti-Christian idea. I don't know where to begin. I mean, it is so anti-Christian to say, I mean, Jesus doesn't want you to suffer anything. He doesn't want you to go through any pain or suffering. That is so mind-blowingly non-Christian, and it makes no sense as far as the history of Christianity and as far as the state of Christianity right now all over the world. I mean, this may not be the worst moment, but there are definitely moments within the past 10 years where Christians were being beheaded and persecuted for their faith. And then to say, we here in America, we Christians, Jesus doesn't want us to suffer. It's like, it's almost racist. And I don't think it comes from that, but think a little. Certainly, whatever you want to say about the rapture, don't say that Jesus doesn't want his bride to be sullied, or he doesn't want her to suffer, so he would never allow her to go through. What's going to be more difficult about the tribulation of the end times than what people went through who were under ISIS, who were tortured and killed for their faith? What is it you can't handle? I'm sorry, I'm such a light. I don't know why I'm such a jolly mood. Probably because I kind of had a rough morning, actually. And it's a difficult passage. I guess that puts me in a sort of a mood because it's kind of like delightful in a way. I understand a lot of passages. I understand some dark sentences. I like to say that because it also makes me feel like my enemies are going to seize on that and say, like, aha, he understands dark things. They're the last king, the man of fierce countenance that Daniel wrote about. He understands dark sentences. But what it means, it's like, it means He's an evil man who knows the things that are hidden in darkness. I wish I could say I was that vile. I'm not. I was always mediocre. My level of evil was always a bit mediocre. You know, I was always a little afraid to do bad things. But that makes my virtue also kind of thin. Because to resist things you really want to do. As I've been working on all my life is trying to, the things I do want to do, the evil that does tempt me, learning how to get a handle on that, learning how to control the passions and lusts that exist within my own frame. Some of us are very prone to good, and it's hard for us to see the depths of our evil. But you know, there's always, like Jesus taught in Sermon on the Mount, man, that's the most important thing. If you want to be righteous, he has a very high righteous standard. So you better be, you know, we don't need any holier than thou people sort of looking down on the rest of us in the faith. So let me get to the interpretations. Gosh, I've been beating around the bush here. So the kingdom of heaven is the subject of violence, or the object of violence, or of forcefulness. And the violent take it by force. Wait a second. There's one more. Take it. Wait, take. That is an interesting. Now, take and by force are both listed in my Bible hub here as being harpazo, which means to seize or snatch, the catching away. So there you go. The take it by force. Take by force is all just one word in Greek. So the violent sees it. That's what it means. Or the forceful sees it. And at this moment, I gotta say, I prefer Mark Nutting's interpretation of this. With a pastor I had a close relationship with for several years, and I still consider him a friend. And I don't know if it was unique to him or if it was something that Pentecostals seize on. The kingdom of heaven is being forced, and the forceful take it. In the context, the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than John. What'd you go out there to see? A reed shaking in the wind? A man clothed in soft raiment? The tough are going to take this kingdom. The forceful. I wish I could say that. I try not to be profane in my language, but you know, I sometimes I have been in my life. Sometimes. Plenty of times. I just heard a weird chime. I wonder where that's coming from. Oh, that's my wife's phone. It's plugged in here. I'm like, ting, ting. So, I want to say, like, it's something it makes me think of something I said to my sons when we were doing a job. And something I try to instill in them. It's like, give care. And that's the most unprofane way I could say that. Give a care about the job you do. Make it, you know what I mean? Like, whatever job you happen to be doing, it's in the Bible. Whatever you do, do it with your might. Don't do it with eye service as men pleasers. You know, you got to go into something. You can't be passive about the faith. If you want the kingdom of heaven, you got to grab it. You got to take it. You know, like when John was confronted with the little book. Give me the little book. Take it and eat it. Eat it. Eat the kingdom. Eat it. You know? You want it to be, you want the keys of the kingdom handed over to you? Take them. Take them. You know, it's like people just want to, I'll just believe and go to, what's the least I can do to enter the kingdom of heaven? Strip off all your clothes, like John the Baptist, and clothe yourselves in camel's hair, run out into the wilderness and start doing something that makes people hate you. I'm not saying that you should go do, you know what I'm saying? But like, that's something forceful about that. Something powerful about that. You know, do something. I have faith to myself. I'm just gonna quietly. Oh, do you believe in God? Yeah. You're a Christian. Yeah. Don't be meek. In that. You know, be meek in your other pursuits. You know, that's the thing is that. It's a fascinating thing. Jesus says, "The meek, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Happy are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." The kingdom of heaven endures violence, and the violent take it. The violent seize it. Take hold of salvation. I have trouble seeing my other interpretation of this right now, just at this moment in time. Because I just see it as like, it's so hard to like, don't be passive about the kingdom of God. Take it. You know, grab a hold of it. Another profane idiom came into my mind. You know, take it by the... It's so wrong. But that's so right also. Seize it. Seize the kingdom. You know what I mean? You want it? Look at the apostles. They all abandoned their lives to be part of the kingdom. My other interpretation my more usual one is that the kingdom of God is sort of persecuted, you know, and people, you know, and this here it goes, like, which is more valid? Maybe this speaks to you more. It's true either way. It's another one of those just irrational numbers. It's like, I don't know what he meant, and I don't know that it matters. Like, both interpretations are truth. It's one of those things. It's like you can have multiple interpretations, and regardless of what was intended, they can both be true, even though they mean vastly different things. Like, they may not be factually correct as like, well, that's not what he meant. But the way I see the world and what God has made, they might both be meant. And that's, you know, how do you account for that? I mean, there's ways to account for it, of course. But I'm just saying, it's like, because you can intend two meanings. People do it all the time with the, you know, poetry and stuff like that. And Jesus was a bit of a poetry in motion, as far as the way I look at it. I haven't written a poem since high school, but I did love it, and I won like the young authors thing when I was in junior high. I think as a kid I thought it was nationwide. I think I just won it in my school. I don't know how that went. I think they just awarded it to outstanding bits of work. course, the things I wrote were so dark, my teachers called my parents. Which is funny. It amused me even then, because I just like dark subjects. You know, I wrote poems about demons and stuff like that. I've never even seen if, like, is it accessible online? There's one I always call it Demon Death. And, yeah. So, the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and the violent take it by force. So, the kingdom of heaven is the second interpretation. Actually, my original interpretation, the first time I went through this, before I encountered my friend Mark Nutting at the Pentecostal church, was like that the kingdom of heaven, like I look at it as like all people, sort of, all these people who do not belong in the kingdom of heaven are sort of forcing their way in, or trying to. The kingdom of heaven suffers violence from the institutional churches. They're all sort of taking, like, we are the representatives of Christ, you know? It's being, you know, co-opted by worldly institutions. And, you know, like, I look at, like, you know, like the way the Pharisees were sort of the lords over Judaism. And, you know, we have also the mainline churches being lords over Christianity. When people want to know what Christianity is about, they look to them first. And, I mean, what authority do I have to speak? They have the authority of all the people. Look at this stream. I don't even know how many people are listening, but it's just going to be a couple. A year from now, maybe it'll be a couple more than that. But, I mean, there's not a lot of people listening. And so what, you know, what do I think do I think people should listen? Might be good for them. But, you know, if I didn't think that, I wouldn't do it. You know what I mean? Of course I think that. Like, people should listen to me. Actually, it started off with people should listen to you. And me agreeing with that. I don't like false humility. It always sounds stupid to me. It's like, I don't know. Anyways, the other violence is like, hey, the kingdom of heaven is suffering from all these hangers-on, so to speak. All these people who have not necessarily been called, but who, you know, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men to me. There are other verses that have a similar sentiment. I'm trying to think of... Dang, there was one that was like, I thought was pretty... It had something to do with Abraham. They saw it. Yeah. Oh. It'll come to me probably this afternoon. The verse I'm thinking about. I think it's in the prophets. Like, they saw it and they put a... Yeah, they put the righteous... Who raised up the righteous man from the east? Is that the verse I'm thinking of? I believe it is. So let's keep running down the rabbit hole and see if we can come up with it. Just because I just want to compare it to that. So I've got my Bible software. You know, kind of stick it up there for you to see, sort of see. That's not good enough. And my Bible collection. Here's my search. Not wedding garment. Let's see. Let's just do righteous east. Believe it or not, that resulted in 6 results. Isaiah 41. Oh, that's not the verse. Oh, wait, no, yeah, it is. Isaiah 41, verse 7 is what I'm thinking. And I'll read you this. Who raised up the righteous man from the east? That refers as far as I understand, to Abraham. Called him to his foot, gave the nations before him, and made him rule over kings. He gave them as the dust to his sword, and was driven stubble to his bow. He pursued them and passed safely, even by the way that he had not gone with his feet. Who hath wrought and done it, calling the generations from the beginning? I, the Lord, the first with the last, the first and with the last am he. That's verse 4. Verse 5. The isles saw it and feared. The ends of the earth were afraid and drew near and came. They helped everyone his neighbor, everyone his brother. Be of good courage. So the carpenter encouraged the goldsmith, and he that smoothed with the hammer, him that smote with the anvil, saying, It is ready for the soldering. And he fastened it with nails, that it should not be removed. And I always thought that was a reference to sort of idolatry, sort of making an image of, God does all these things, and they hear about it, and they're like, wow, let's do something about it. And so then they try to nail it down. You know what I mean? They try to take religion and God, and they put lightning in the bottle, so to speak. We'll put it in the bottle. We'll nail it down. Where's the carpenter? Where's the goldsmith? Let's cast this solid forever. Idols. But in our faith, God commanded us not to make idols, images. But we do it all the time. Lutheranism, Calvinism, Catholicism, Orthodoxy. It's all sort of... I mean, those different religions, nothing against Orthodoxy per se. Nothing against tradition even. But we gotta be careful we don't allow any sort of flexibility. And also that we also don't want to be reeds shaken in the wind. John was not a reed shaken in the wind. He was forceful. Wow, we're at 42. Here we go. I would just love to sit here all day talking about this. That's why you should subscribe. I guess I don't, and also click on the like button. I don't know. It feels nice when I see likes. I guess. It doesn't matter. I'm not waiting for you to like this. I haven't checked questions all week, but I will check them. It becomes... you can send your questions. If you have a question right here and now, you can put it in the chat, and I'm looking at that right now. And the only thing I see is my own comment about running late. Yeah, it would be so easy for me to sit here for hours every day instead of just 1 hour. Not easy necessarily, because it's early in the morning and I gotta get to work and I'm tired. And so, but I mean, I can easily be caught up in that sort of thing. And you can see my house come to life. There's 10 people who live here. That's why it's first thing in the morning. It's the quietest moment of the day. So, there's another way to look at the idea of violence. Okay, let's move on. From the days of John the Baptist till now. Oh, I've read that. All right, we're on verse 13. Let's go to verse 13. All the prophets in the law prophesied till John, and if you will receive it, this is Elias, which was for to come. I talked about that yesterday, how in the book of Malachi, it says he would send someone, his messenger before him. It's in the second last chapter of Malachi. I will send your messenger before your face, and Jesus quoted that earlier in this chapter. And then there is at the end of the Old Testament, the last book, or the last verse of the last book. The last chapter, last verse, or just about there. The last couple verses. The last thing said in Malachi. The last two verses, yeah. Malachi 4:5 and 4:6. It says that I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord, and he shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers. And Jesus is saying, if you will receive it, this is Elias. This is your Elijah. And what he's saying is the Old Testament prophet, it didn't mean Elijah was literally coming back, but a Elijah-like figure. And you think about Elijah, what was Elijah's role? Because you understand, a lot of the prophets were actually within the king's court or within the circle. Not a lot, but to some degree. There are a lot of figures like that are like Samuel. Samuel was like, right? He anointed the king. He made the king. The king was waiting around for him. The king was kind of subject to the priest. You know, Samuel, the last judge. Because they were ruled over by sort of what's it called? I'm disgusted with myself because I know these words. I keep thinking it's not an aristocracy. It is not a meritocracy. It is a religious-strocracy. That's a joke. But there are people yelling at their screens in the future. It's a theocracy. Thank you. I heard you from the future. I heard you yelling theocracy. Or maybe you were yelling that today. They were ruled over by kind of a theocracy. Where it was like the priest was kind of... The leader was like not a king, but like a judge. And the judge was kind of... Moses was the original judge, and that was sort of his role, to judge the people and to judge their things. And then there was a series of judges. Samuel, preceded by characters like Samson and Gideon and the other judges of the book of Judges, which you can read all about. If you receive it, this is Elias. He's saying this is the one who was to come, if you would receive it. And Elijah, well, that Elias is the Greek transliteration of the Hebrew translated into English. So Elias is Elijah, same name, just different, expressed into English from Greek instead of from Hebrew. So you get like a translation of a translation in that case. This is Elijah. Elijah the prophet was, he was living in caves. How many am I gotta clean out that computer because it is just noisy. Bugs me. You probably don't even notice it. So he was living in caves. He was being like, the prayer of Elijah was, Lord, they have killed your prophets, they have digged down your altars, and I'm left alone. I stand alone against a system that has completely rejected you, rejected me. He is the outsider, the lone. I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness. He was crying in the wilderness, Elijah. He was out there, and all the prophets of Baal were prevailing with the king. He had to hide. And so it becomes a very different picture. That's what I mean. Like the priests and the servants of God are usually at the center of the world, leading in a way to benefit everybody, but the prophets of God were marginalized. That's not always the case. And like religion, like the church is sort of at the center. But when it becomes corrupt, like in our society, we have the church, and at the center are all the pastors, and they're authoritative, and people look to them, and they are all there. But if it's corrupt, if you can't speak to, if they cannot be spoken to, those at the peak of the hierarchy in religion, if they cannot be reached, if they become so fossilized, they become so, then comes along the violent to take the kingdom by force. John the Baptist, the Lord Jesus, and he came in, he cast out the money changers, he disrupted the order. And right now, in the world we live in, the order needs to be disrupted. Things are not right. Doesn't mean that people in church aren't good. It just means they're not well led. They're not well served. And the kingdom has to be taken by force again. Yeah, in the Reformation of Luther, those were all things that were forceful. Who raised up Martin Luther and gave him the wisdom to know, and those 95 Theses? He did a great. Well, I'm not saying anything against Luther. It's Lutheranism that I have the problem with. Meaning, so the carpenter encouraged the goldsmith, and he that smote with the anvil, he that smote with the hammer, and they fastens it with nails that it should never be moved. We need to take what Luther did and cast it into an idol so it never gets moved again. I'm not saying they worship it like an idol, but I'm just saying there's a certain sort of... God is like so... like we talk about the Trinity, and we know that that's sort of a paradoxical... There's no analog to God in the world. You know what I mean? So on some level, God, like in his essence of who he is, defies description. We describe him. Someone asked me to define God, and I had a heck of a time. Because I know that the things I say are going to, we can say things like he's all powerful, he's all knowing, etc., etc., etc. But we can never fully describe God. We can't put him under a microscope. We can't know him, at least not from this position of observation. So the temptation to nail him down is not a good idea. If you were to receive it, this is Elias, which was for to come. He was the Elijah of their time. The one who was the outsider, who had the right idea, who had the truth. He was not at he was, they came out to see, they came out to see him. I don't remember. And he said to them, John, when the Pharisees came out, and they're at the center of, I'm using these ideas of the center and the margin to try to it's a way of talking about human existence. Because there is sort of the church can be, and here you can feel it because the church is not central anymore to the lives of people like in our country. The church was really at the center of our human experience for many years. And that started falling apart because people started drifting away from God and from the faith. Though, even in countries they'll talk about Sweden being that most of the people don't go, they don't believe in that. But they all believe in something. Not all. But it's not an atheist country or anything. It's 70% of the people, or whatever, some percentage, believe in something more than just nothing. They just lost faith in the church. They believe in some sort of spiritual reality. They just, and it's a large, I forgot the exact percentage, but it's more than 70%. It's still, I forgot the exact percent. I'm just saying that is a low end thing. Because they'll count everyone who doesn't believe in Jesus or Christianity specifically. They'll say they're atheists, even though they believe in some sort of spirituality or something like that. They got some other superstition, but that doesn't. that you're not a skeptic. Truly, when you still hold on to superstitions like good and bad, good and evil. If you believe in evil, you're superstitious, whether you want to believe it or not. Jesus says, he that hath ears to hear, let him hear. That's a very frequent refrain he uses in all the Gospels. And it is a marker of like, when I hear that, I'm just like, ugh. It means you got to really listen. You got to really pay attention. You have ears? Then hear. Well, we all have ears. Except for, well, you might be deaf. Again, it's not a literal thing. It's a spiritual thing. Like, because even a deaf person can listen. Because it means the listening means to allow the words spoken or written. You can listen to what you're reading. Because it entails the idea of, like Jesus said, take heed how you hear. Like my wife was telling me last night, and we talk about these things frequently. It's funny, like about how we met. And the day we met, she was sitting there thinking, and then she heard me speaking, even though the whole time I was speaking, I was tuned out. It was just words, and she was thinking, okay, what am I going to do? I lost my keys. I can't get home without my keys. I called my mom, and then she's done. She's thinking about what she should do to find her keys, etc., etc. And then all of a sudden she notices me in the background talking about the Bible. Because I was in a Bible study. That's how we met. She walked in. And there was a moment where you're like tuning in. Listen. Really listen. To hear implies to hear with understanding. You know what I mean? If you're able to hear this, because some people, like, you can talk to them, and it's literally like talking to the wall. Any given subject, and you've had this happen in your life where you're talking to someone, you're trying to explain it to them. It's not just that they're not paying attention. It's like they have some sort of mental block in their mind that's like, it'd be like if someone came to me trying to convince me that the earth was flat. I'd really have to work hard to try to, in my mind, to allow myself to take their ideas seriously. Though honestly, I am one of the most open people you might ever find. That's not meant to be bragging. I'm literally, to me, it's a sense of vulnerability. I am so open to ideas. Like when, I'm telling you, it's almost like, I feel like it's almost like a mental disorder, because it has its upside in that it allows me a lot of access to thought. It's like, I've got ears to hear. My enemies would definitely say otherwise, even though I heard all the things Arnold Murray had to say. I was a very credulous child. I was easy to fool, because I tended to believe things that people told me. But that also bred in me through being made a fool, through being humiliated as a young person, and I mean humiliated. It made me become very skeptical as I hear things, because they get in ideas. That doesn't mean I can't be oblivious. Or just, are you listening to me? No, because I'm just not listening. Tuning someone out is one thing, but it's another thing when you listen to the words and you're not hearing them. I'm not hearing what you're saying because I've got a different thought in my mind the whole time. Like if, like I think I know something. It's like when you think you know someone and someone tries to tell you different. It's hard to hear them. And that's what Jesus is saying. I'm trying to tell you something different. You may not be ready. John the Baptist is Elijah? John the Baptist can't be Elijah. I can't hear that. And that's the kind of thing. And so Jesus says things sometimes that are upsetting, upsetting in the sense they upset our idea of what's right. The least of the kingdom of heaven is greater than the greatest prophet. Can you hear that? It's a question of understanding, yes. But it's also a question of receiving a difficult saying. If we are not open to receiving something difficult, it's going to be very difficult for us to understand it. So like I said, with the interpreting of the violence and stuff, if we're not ready to hear ideas that go, because I offered two vastly different interpretations. And what I often say is, if you understand all the interpretations, people will say, well, there are all these interpretations. There are only a few that make any sense. I could go through and I could say silly things. So, well, that's a possible interpretation. But it's not a very probable interpretation. The probable interpretations are going to be limited in any given context to just a few. Just a few are at all likely to be true. Just a few are at all likely to make sense. So if you can find all the sensible interpretations, that's like half the battle. Then all you need is the Holy Spirit to convict you on which one is the right one. But a lot of times you don't have the convictions, but just know both interpretations. There's some things, there's not a lot of, like some things you don't have to interpret. Like we know good and evil when we see it. Or do we? Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. I really wanted to get into the next verse for this, but I want to save it for the morning. Because it's such a really good little section, and I'm going to have plenty to say about that. Oh, I love this part. Yeah. There is no... We only got like 5 minutes left. Take heed how you hear and with what measure you meet. That's something also from the Sermon on the Mount, as far as, judge not that you be not judged, for with what judgment you judge, you shall be judged. You be careful about how you hear things, about how you measure things, about how you judge things. And they had judged John in his day. They had said, well, he gets to it. I'll bring this in a little bit. They had said of him, John came neither eating and drinking, and they say, he hath a devil. He's a demon-possessed man. Look at how much difference is there between the guys living in the tomb and everybody's afraid because they're so fierce. And John the Baptist out there preaching in the wilderness, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. He's like a fearsome character, and they're afraid of him. When he greeted the Pharisees, who has warned you to flee from the wrath to come? When they came out to him, who warned you to flee? Because you better run away, because the wrath is coming. He that comes after me is, he knew there was one coming after him. He that comes after me is greater. I am not worthy to latch at his shoes. John even said that the one who came out after him would be greater. This man hath a devil. And of course of Jesus they said, behold, a gluttonous man and a winebibber. Because he came eating. John came fasting, and Jesus comes eating and drinking, going to feasts, meeting with people, a friend of publicans and sinners. That's what they called him. Well, I'd hope to get through a lot more verses, but we just got through just the 4. But it's a difficult passage to really, like I said, like the violent take it by force. So be violent. That's very contrary wisdom to what we think that violence. Don't be violent. Even saying so, I know, like when I say like be violent, be forceful. Force things. I remember I used to say like I want to I do scripture songs because I want to impose on people's minds. I want to like force the scriptures into their minds. I remember meeting some Korean guys, and they totally Korean Christian guys from a kind of a cultic church, but they were really hip with that idea. They were South Koreans, but like it's a cultural thing, really. For us, we think of this forcefulness as being like, ooh, our culture has become so feminized that I still like am afraid about what I said on Sunday when I talked about thunder out of heaven. But you know, what, are you afraid to yell at people yell at their kids all the time. I'm not even advocating yelling at your kids like all the time. If you yell at your kids all the time, it's like, it's not even, what'll happen is first they will, not disdain, but they will begin to take you lightly. Well, that's disdain, but there was a word I wanted instead. Like they take you lightly, and then they think you're absolutely the worst. You know, then they begin. It goes from taking you lightly to disdain to why is my vocabulary failing me today? To despising, I'll use that. To absolute hatred. And because if you just do something distasteful to them constantly, it just, they don't, what I always say is my children adore me and are terrified of me. It's good if you can maintain both those things. You're going to have a great relationship with your children as a father. I speak for fathers. Women, it's a different formula. I want to be adored and feared. That's the right way for a father to be. If you lose one or the other, you're failing. Because if you stop being feared, you will be despised. Because nobody likes a weak man. That's just, I'm sorry. And you don't have to be a tough guy. I like when I was a child, my father feared my mother would turn me into a faggot. Okay, you know what I mean? Like because I was like this bookish kind of scrawny, I got a picture sometime, you know, weakling. I was very tall but skinny and not very impressive or fierce or anything. And anyone that was ever afraid of me growing up, you know, I didn't get, you know, I could say I got bullied once. There was one person who ever bullied me. There are other incidences I think of kids bullying me, but actually it was just they were picking on me, but there was no like serial incidents. And I think of guys that I thought of as having bullied me, but really they were just mean. You know, and kids are that way. They were just kind of mean to me. And actually I knew them, you know, later in life I realized that I knew they were bullied by their parents of all people. As far as they were mentally abused and made to feel, you know, so them being hard on me was understandable because that's how they were raised. I almost said his name, but there was a kid who actually bullied me, like an older kid. He broke my nose. That's why it's crooked. In case you didn't know, so it's like, yeah, no, there's no way to line this up. There's no way to, you can't see. It's never straight. Anyways. So we think of violence as being, you know, we were afraid of bullies and stuff. And like I said, I by no means came that way. I learned to be violent. And to be tough. You know, it didn't come by nature. Though I'll tell you what, when you're weak, you learn toughness in a sense. Like I said, like I believed things. And it made me tough in the sense of like I got sick of being humiliated. I didn't like getting punched in the face. Actually, I got punched in the face after I was pinned down by 6 kids, and they were threatening to tie me up and throw me in the creek. And so I kicked and punched my way out of it, and then I walked away. I should have ran. Walking away allowed one of the kids to run after me and punch me in the nose, breaking it. So, you know, if you want the kingdom, you got to be ready to get punched in the face, so to speak, and to take it on the chin, so to speak, and also to punch back. But Paul, wait, you can't say that. Jesus, you know, happy are the meek, the poor. Why are the violent? You know, I come not to bring peace but a sword. Blessed are the peacemakers. You have to use wisdom to understand what is meant. And it's like, I'm not saying go out and do violence. What I'm saying is violence is going to happen. The violent are going to take the kingdom by force. So if the violent are there to take the kingdom by force, what if they're wicked? You know, we got to be violent back. We got to be John the Baptist back. And I mean violent, I mean it spiritually. You understand me? Like the violent, forceful. Meaning, I got to stand up for what I believe in. I got to be assertive. There's a more word. You know, people, oh, assertiveness. We like that. I have to take my view of the scriptures and state that, you know, and sort of cram them, not down people's throat, but like in my Bible study, I'm sort of just cramming my views right down your throat. If you'll listen. You know what I mean? You have to listen. I'm not going to take anyone against their will. Well, what'd you come out here for to see? You know what I'm saying? Like, dude, what'd you want to see? A reed shaking with the wind? No, you're going to see a guy saying, you know, he's going to cram it. That was John the Baptist. He's saying, this is how it is. He was forceful. Eric, you want to enter the kingdom of God? I'm pretending. That's me pantomiming, holding someone under the water. Die! Die! So, there we go. The forceful take the kingdom. Subscribe to my channel and hear other such bizarre things. And then, of course, you can ask questions. That's my website. I'm getting lazy about the card because I'm just like, it's all linked in the description below. It's all linked in the description below. Anyways, thank you for joining me in the study today. I look forward to studying with you again tomorrow. Let's pick a song for our little goodbye. Let's do this.